The autumn rain fell like tears from a grieving sky, turning the cobblestones of the inn yard into a treacherous maze of mud and standing water. Rosalind Fletcher knelt in the mire before the Crimson Rose Inn, her once elegant travelling dress now sodden and stained beyond recognition, her hands clasped in desperate supplication before the innkeeper who held her very survival in his calloused grasp. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the steady drumming of rain on the inn's slate roof. "I have nowhere else to go. I can work for my keep. I can cook, clean, tend the fires, anything you need." Thomas Grimsby, the inn's proprietor, looked down at her with the cold calculation of a man who had learned to measure human worth in coins and convenience. "Work?" he scoffed, his breath creating clouds in the chill October air. "What use is a fine lady's work to me? You've never scrubbed a floor in your life, I'd wager." The year was 1843, and England stood poised between the old world of rigid social hierarchies and the new age of industrial progress. The coaching inn stood at a crossroads both literal and metaphorical, where the Great North Road met the turnpike to Edinburgh, and where travellers from every station in life crossed paths in the eternal dance of commerce and necessity. Rosalind had arrived at the Crimson Rose 3 days prior, in a hired carriage, her last coin spent on the desperate gamble of reaching her aunt's estate in Yorkshire. But the letter she had carried with such hope, the one promising sanctuary and family reconciliation, had proven to be cruelly outdated. Lady Pemberton had died the previous winter, and her estate had passed to distant cousins who had never heard of Rosalind Fletcher, and certainly had no intention of harbouring a penniless relation. "I can learn," Rosalind insisted, though her voice shook with exhaustion and desperation. "I'm educated. I can read and write. I speak French and Italian. I understand accounts." "Accounts?" Grimsby's laugh was harsh as breaking glass. "What good are your foreign tongues and book learning in a common inn? I need girls who can haul water and turn mattresses, not recite poetry." The other travellers gathered under the inn's covered porch watched the scene unfold with the casual cruelty of those who had their own warm beds secured for the night. Some looked on with pity, others with the uncomfortable recognition that fortune could be capricious, and a few with the satisfied superiority of those who believed poverty to be a moral failing. Rosalind's fall from grace had been swift and complete. 6 months ago she had been the cherished ward of Lord Pemberton, living in comfort in his London mansion, receiving the finest education money could provide, and looking forward to a season that would surely result in an advantageous marriage. Her guardian had been kind, treating her more as a beloved niece than a charity case, and she had known nothing but security and affection. Then Lord Pemberton had died suddenly of a heart attack, and Rosalind's world had crumbled like a house built on sand. The will, when read, had contained provisions for her care, but those provisions were contingent upon her marriage to Lord Pemberton's nephew, Marcus Pemberton, a dissolute younger son with gambling debts and a reputation for cruelty toward women. The marriage would have cleared Marcus's obligations while ensuring Rosalind's continued comfort, but it would have been a prison sentence disguised as a wedding vow. Rosalind had refused the match and fled London with what little money she could gather, hoping to reach her deceased mother's family in Yorkshire. But her funds had run out just as her hopes had been dashed, leaving her stranded at a country inn with nothing but the clothes on her back and the bitter knowledge that society had no place for a woman without male protection. "Get up from there," Grimsby ordered, his voice taking on a harder edge. "You're making a spectacle of yourself, and it's bad for business. Pack whatever belongings you have and be gone within the hour." "Gone where?" Rosalind asked, though she feared the answer. The nearest village was 5 miles distant, and she had neither the strength for such a walk nor the assurance of better welcome when she arrived. "That's not my concern," Grimsby replied with brutal indifference. "You've no money for a room, and I'll not have beggars cluttering my doorway." The rain intensified as if nature herself were weeping for the injustice being played out in the inn yard. Rosalind remained kneeling in the mud, paralyzed by the realization that she had reached the absolute end of her options. Pride and dignity seemed laughable luxuries when measured against the basic need for shelter from the storm. It was then that the sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through the steady patter of rain, not the tired clopping of a farm horse or the rattling approach of a common coach, but the rhythmic thunder of a fine horse ridden with purpose and skill. The gathered crowd turned toward the sound, instinctively recognizing the approach of someone of significance. The rider who emerged from the rain-soaked darkness was like a figure from a romantic ballad brought to life. His mount was a magnificent black stallion that seemed to dance even while standing still. And the man in the saddle possessed the kind of natural authority that made lesser mortals step aside without conscious thought. Even through the gloom and rainfall, his bearing proclaimed him nobility of the highest order. Prince Adrian Blackthorne, second son of His Majesty King William, heir to nothing but his own accomplishments, and the substantial estate he had carved from military service and shrewd investment. He had been riding hard from London, driven by urgent business in Scotland, when the storm had forced him to seek shelter at the first respectable inn along his route. The prince's amber eyes took in the scene before him, with the quick assessment of a man trained to read both battlefields and drawing rooms. He saw the innkeeper's aggressive stance, the cowering woman in the mud, and the crowd of onlookers who were allowing injustice to unfold for their entertainment. His expression darkened, with an anger that spoke of moral convictions, forged in honor and tempered by responsibility. What is the meaning of this? Prince Adrian's voice carried the unmistakable authority of generations of royal blood, though he had not yet revealed his identity. Grimsby straightened automatically, recognizing quality, even if he didn't know the specific rank. Nothing to concern yourself with, sir. Just a vagrant who needs moving along. Prince Adrian dismounted with fluid grace, his boots splashing in the muddy water as he approached the kneeling woman. From this closer vantage, he could see that her clothes, though ruined by weather and circumstance, were of fine quality. More telling still were her hands, soft, uncalloused, clearly belonging to someone unaccustomed to manual labor. "Madam," he said gently, his voice pitched for her ears alone, "are you injured?" Rosalind looked up at the stranger, and her breath caught in her throat. Even in the dim light of the inn's lanterns, she could see that this was a man who commanded attention, not just through wealth and station, but through the sheer force of character that radiated from his every gesture. His amber eyes held intelligence, compassion, and something else, a recognition of her humanity that no one else had shown in weeks. "No, sir," she managed to reply, though her voice shook with exhaustion. "Not injured, only displaced." Prince Adrian studied her face with growing concern. This woman was clearly gently bred, educated, and well-spoken, despite her current circumstances. Whatever had brought her to kneel in the mud before a common inn was a story worth hearing, and more importantly, a wrong worth righting. Without hesitation, Prince Adrian extended his gloved hand to her. "Then allow me to help you rise." The simple gesture rippled through the watching crowd, like a stone thrown into still water. For a gentleman of obvious quality to offer his hand to a woman the innkeeper had declared a vagrant was either an act of extraordinary kindness or an indication that appearances could be deceiving. Rosalind stared at the offered hand as if it were a miracle made flesh. After weeks of rejection, scorn, and calculated indifference, this stranger's simple courtesy struck her with the force of revelation. Slowly, hardly daring to believe, she placed her muddy fingers in his clean glove. Prince Adrian helped her to her feet, with the same grave courtesy he would have shown a duchess, and in that moment, Rosalind felt her faith in human decency begin its long journey back from the darkness where despair had driven it. "Now then," Prince Adrian said, his voice carrying clearly across the inn-yard as he turned to face the innkeeper, "perhaps you would be good enough to explain why this lady is being turned out into such a storm." The atmosphere in the inn-yard shifted palpably as Prince Adrian's challenge hung in the air. Grimsby found himself facing a dilemma he had not anticipated: how to maintain his authority over his own establishment while dealing with a gentleman who clearly outranked him in every conceivable way. "Sir," Grimsby began, his tone now carefully respectful, "the lady arrived 3 days past with no luggage save a small valise and coin enough for only one night's lodging. She's been unable to settle her account since, and I've a business to run." Prince Adrian's expression remained neutral, but those who knew him well would have recognized the dangerous calm that preceded his most decisive actions. "I see. And the lady's explanation for her circumstances claims to be quality," Grimsby replied with a shrug that attempted dismissiveness, but achieved only nervous discomfort. "Says she's the ward of some lord or other, but what proof is there? Anyone can claim noble connections when it suits their purpose." Rosalind straightened, drawing on reserves of dignity she had thought exhausted. "I was the ward of Lord Pemberton of Grosvenor Square. His lordship's death left me between protections." Prince Adrian's amber eyes sharpened with interest and recognition. "Lord Pemberton? Charles Pemberton, who served in the Peninsula?" "Yes," Rosalind confirmed, surprised that this stranger knew her guardian. "Did you know his lordship?" "I had the honor of serving under his command during the siege of Badajoz," Prince Adrian replied, his voice carrying the weight of old respect and shared military brotherhood. He was a good man and a fine officer. His death was a loss to the realm. The revelation sent murmurs through the gathering crowd. If this elegant stranger had served with Lord Pemberton, he was clearly a military man of some standing, and his interest in the lady's welfare took on new significance. "Then you understand," Rosalind said, her voice stronger now, "that I speak the truth about my circumstances. Lord Pemberton provided for me in his will, but only under conditions I could not accept." Prince Adrian studied her face, reading between the lines of what she had revealed. A gentleman's will that provided for a female ward, under conditions, typically meant marriage to a designated heir, regardless of the lady's preferences. That she had chosen poverty over such security suggested either remarkable principle or equally remarkable desperation. "Mr. Grimsby," Prince Adrian said, turning back to the innkeeper with authority that brooked no argument, "I shall settle the lady's account and secure appropriate lodging for her. What is the sum owed?" £2 6 sir," Grimsby replied quickly, his calculations suddenly precise now that payment appeared forthcoming. "For 3 nights?" Prince Adrian's eyebrows rose slightly. "Your rates seem rather steep for a coaching inn." "Well, sir, the lady has been taking her meals as well, and there's the matter of the fire in her chamber and the washing of her linens and—" "Quite." Prince Adrian's tone cut through the innkeeper's elaborations with surgical precision. He withdrew a leather purse from his coat and counted out coins with deliberate care. £3 should cover all charges and secure the lady's accommodation for another week. As Grimsby pocketed the coins with barely concealed avarice, Prince Adrian turned his attention back to Rosalind. "Miss Fletcher," she supplied quietly. "Miss Rosalind Fletcher." "Miss Fletcher, if I may suggest, you appear in need of dry clothing and a warm meal. Perhaps we might continue our conversation once you've had opportunity to recover from your ordeal." The kindness in his voice nearly undid what remained of Rosalind's composure. After weeks of hostility and indifference, such basic human decency seemed almost too generous to accept. "Sir, you are very kind," she managed, "but I cannot allow you to pay my expenses. I have no means to repay such generosity, and I would not wish to impose upon a stranger, however noble his intentions." "Then we shall consider it a debt of honor to Lord Pemberton's memory," Prince Adrian replied smoothly. "Any officer who served under his command would consider it a privilege to assist his ward in her time of need." The explanation provided a framework that allowed Rosalind to accept help without compromising her remaining dignity, a consideration that did not escape Prince Adrian's notice. This was a woman who valued her independence and self-respect above even her physical comfort, qualities he found both admirable and troubling in their current context. "Mrs. Hartwell," Prince Adrian called to the innkeeper's wife, who had been watching the proceedings from the doorway with obvious fascination. "Please see that Miss Fletcher is provided with whatever she requires. Hot water for washing, dry clothing if any suitable garments are available, and a tray in her room rather than the common dining area." Mrs. Hartwell bobbed a quick curtsy, clearly delighted to have a gentleman of obvious quality taking charge of the situation. "Of course, sir. Right away, sir." As Rosalind was led away by the suddenly solicitous Mrs. Hartwell, Prince Adrian turned to address the dispersing crowd with a look that scattered them more effectively than any verbal command. Within moments, the inn-yard was empty, save for himself, Grimsby, and a stable boy, who had appeared to tend to his horse. "A word, Mr. Grimsby," Prince Adrian said quietly, but with unmistakable authority. "Sir?" The innkeeper approached with the wary respect of a man who had recognized that he was dealing with someone far above his usual clientele. "Miss Fletcher is clearly a lady of quality, who has encountered misfortune through no fault of her own. While she remains under this roof, she will be treated with the respect due her station. Any discourtesy shown to her will be considered a personal affront to myself. Do I make myself clear?" "Perfectly clear, sir," Grimsby replied, though his expression suggested he found the protection of penniless gentlewomen to be an unprofitable business practice. "Excellent. I shall require your finest available chamber for myself, and I expect Miss Fletcher's accommodation to be equally suitable. The lady has suffered enough indignities." As Prince Adrian was shown to his rooms, his mind was already working through the implications of the evening's encounter. Miss Fletcher's situation was more precarious than she had revealed. A gently bred woman without protection or resources was vulnerable to dangers far worse than simple poverty. The fact that she had chosen destitution over whatever conditions had been attached to her inheritance suggested those conditions had been particularly odious. Military training had taught Prince Adrian to recognize strategic situations, and this was clearly one of them. Miss Fletcher needed more than temporary charity. She needed a comprehensive solution to her circumstances. The question was whether she possessed the courage to accept help that went beyond mere financial assistance. An hour later, a soft knock at Prince Adrian's door announced the arrival of Mrs. Hartwell with his requested dinner tray. "If you please, sir," the woman said as she arranged the meal, "the young lady wanted me to convey her deepest gratitude for your kindness. She asked me to tell you that she will join you in the private dining room tomorrow morning to discuss repayment terms, if that would be convenient." Prince Adrian smiled slightly at Miss Fletcher's determination to maintain proper business formalities despite her circumstances. "Please inform Miss Fletcher that I would be honored by her company at breakfast, and that we need not trouble ourselves with talk of repayment until she is feeling more herself." "Very good, sir. Oh, and sir, the lady asked me to mention that she has some small items of jewelry that might serve as collateral for your kindness. She's quite determined not to be seen as a charity case." The information both impressed and concerned Prince Adrian. Miss Fletcher's insistence on maintaining her independence was admirable, but her resources were clearly finite. Whatever solution he proposed would need to preserve her dignity while addressing the practical realities of her situation. As Prince Adrian prepared for sleep, his thoughts remained fixed on the woman he had found kneeling in the mud. There had been something in her eyes, an intelligence and spirit that circumstances had battered but not broken, that suggested she was far more than she appeared. The mystery of what had driven her to such desperate straits would require delicate investigation, but he was beginning to suspect that Miss Rosalind Fletcher might prove to be the most interesting traveling companion he had encountered in years. Outside his window, the storm continued its assault on the countryside, but within the Crimson Rose Inn, two lives had intersected in ways that would change the course of both their destinies. Dawn broke grey and subdued over the Yorkshire countryside, the previous night's storm having washed the world clean, but left it somber under heavy clouds. Prince Adrian rose early, as was his military habit, and made his way to the inn's private dining room to find Miss Fletcher already seated at the polished oak table, her hands folded primly in her lap as she waited. The transformation in her appearance was remarkable. Mrs. Hartwell had evidently found suitable clothing, a simple but well-made dress of deep blue wool that complemented her coloring while maintaining perfect propriety. Her chestnut hair had been properly arranged, and though she remained pale from her recent ordeal, she no longer looked like a woman on the verge of collapse. "Miss Fletcher," Prince Adrian said, offering a respectful bow, "I trust you slept well?" "Better than I have in weeks, thanks to your generosity," Rosalind replied, rising to offer a graceful curtsy. "I hope you will allow me to express my gratitude properly, along with my proposal for repayment." Prince Adrian gestured for her to be seated, noting the careful formality with which she conducted herself. Despite her recent circumstances, Miss Fletcher clearly remembered every nuance of proper social interaction, a skill that suggested an education far above what most young women of even comfortable means received. "Before we discuss business matters," Prince Adrian said as Mrs. Hartwell appeared with breakfast trays, "perhaps you would tell me how you came to be acquainted with Lord Pemberton. He spoke occasionally of his ward during the Peninsular campaign, but I confess I know few details of his domestic arrangements." A shadow of pain crossed Rosalind's features. "Lord Pemberton was my father's closest friend. When my parents died in a carriage accident when I was 14, he took me into his household and treated me with the same affection he might have shown a daughter of his blood. I owe everything I am to his kindness and guidance." "He was indeed a man of extraordinary character," Prince Adrian agreed. "I remember him speaking of his responsibility to a young lady whose education he considered his most important duty. He was quite proud of your accomplishments." Rosalind's eyes brightened with both pleasure and sorrow. "He insisted I receive instruction in languages, mathematics, literature, and natural philosophy. He said a woman's mind was as capable as any man's, if properly cultivated, and that ignorance was the greatest enemy of happiness." The picture emerging was of a young woman who had received an education that would have been remarkable even among the highest nobility, certainly far more comprehensive than most ladies of her station. It explained her poise and articulation, but it also made her current circumstances more poignant. And yet, Prince Adrian said gently, you chose to refuse the provisions of his will rather than accept the security they offered. That suggests the conditions attached were particularly objectionable. Rosalind's hands tightened in her lap. Lord Pemberton's will left me a substantial dowry and a comfortable annual income, but only if I married his nephew Marcus within 6 months of his lordship's death. If I refused the match, I would receive nothing save a single payment of £50, what he termed travelling money to seek my fortune elsewhere. And Mr. Marcus Pemberton proved unsuitable as a husband? Prince Adrian kept his tone carefully neutral, though he was beginning to form his own conclusions. Marcus Pemberton is a gambler, a drunkard, and worse, Rosalind said quietly but firmly. He made his intentions toward me clear within days of his uncle's funeral. Marriage to him would have been a form of legalized servitude, and I chose poverty over such a fate. Prince Adrian nodded thoughtfully. The picture was becoming clearer. Lord Pemberton had intended to provide for his ward's security through marriage, but had misjudged his nephew's character. It was a common enough miscalculation among older gentlemen who assumed family blood guaranteed honour. The £50 brought you this far north? He asked. I had hoped to reach my mother's family in Yorkshire. My aunt, Lady Pemberton of Thornfield Manor, was my mother's elder sister. I believed she might offer sanctuary while I determined my future course. Rosalind's voice grew smaller. But when I arrived, I learned that Lady Pemberton had died this past winter, and the estate had passed to cousins who had never heard of me. The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Miss Fletcher had gambled everything on a single hope for family reconciliation, only to find that hope 3 months buried. Her alternatives had been exhausted, her resources depleted, and her situation growing more desperate by the day. I see, Prince Adrian said quietly. And now you find yourself without resources or connections, dependent upon the charity of strangers. Which is why I must insist upon repaying your kindness, Rosalind said, reaching into her reticule to withdraw a small jewelry case. I have these items. My mother's pearls, a ruby ring that was my grandmother's, and a diamond brooch that Lord Pemberton gave me for my 21st birthday. They should more than cover my expenses here. Prince Adrian examined the jewelry she displayed, recognizing pieces of genuine quality and significant value. More importantly, he recognized what they represented, the last tangible connections to everyone who had ever loved her. That she was willing to sacrifice them spoke volumes about both her desperation and her determination to maintain her independence. Miss Fletcher, he said carefully, these pieces are far too valuable to waste on inexpenses. More than that, they are family heirlooms that should be preserved for sentimental reasons. Sentiment is a luxury I can no longer afford, Rosalind replied with painful honesty. I must be practical about my situation. Then let us indeed be practical. Prince Adrian leaned forward, his amber eyes serious. Your current circumstances require more than temporary assistance. You need a comprehensive solution that addresses both your immediate needs and your long-term security. I'm not sure I understand. Prince Adrian was quiet for a moment, weighing his words carefully. What he was about to propose would change both their lives irrevocably, but the more he considered Miss Fletcher's situation, the more convinced he became that he had arrived at the only viable solution. Miss Fletcher, he began, I find myself in need of assistance with a matter that requires someone of education, discretion, and unquestionable integrity. The position would provide comfortable lodging, a generous salary, and the respect due your station. More importantly, it would offer protection from the kind of circumstances that brought you to this inn. Rosalind stared at him with a mixture of hope and suspicion. What kind of position, sir? I'm travelling to Scotland to take possession of a property I recently inherited, Ravens Hollow Castle in the Highlands. The estate comes with extensive lands, a large household staff, and sadly decades of neglect from previous owners. I require someone to serve as chatelaine, to restore the household to proper function and oversee the education of my young ward. The offer was both generous and perfectly respectable, providing Miss Fletcher with exactly the kind of position that would restore her to her proper social level while offering protection and purpose. But Rosalind was studying his face with the intelligence that had impressed Lord Pemberton. You have a ward, sir? She asked quietly. Prince Adrian hesitated for just a moment too long before answering. A distant cousin's daughter. She has been neglected in her upbringing and requires the kind of guidance that only a properly educated lady could provide. It was not precisely a lie, but it was not the complete truth either. Prince Adrian did indeed have responsibility for a young lady, but the circumstances were more complex than he was prepared to reveal to someone he had known for less than 24 hours. "And you would offer this position to a complete stranger?" Rosalind pressed. "A woman you found kneeling in the mud with no references save her own word about her background?" "I would offer it to Lord Pemberton's ward," Prince Adrian corrected. "A woman whose education and character he vouched for repeatedly, whose courage in adversity I witnessed personally, and whose integrity is demonstrated by her refusal to accept charity without offering repayment." The logic was sound, but Rosalind sensed undercurrents she couldn't quite identify. This stranger, who still had not revealed his own name or station, was offering her salvation, but at what cost? Experience had taught her to be wary of offers that seemed too generous, especially from men who possessed the kind of authority this one wielded so naturally. "Sir," she said carefully, "before I could consider such an offer, I would need to know more about you. You know my name and circumstances, but I know nothing of yours beyond your connection to Lord Pemberton." Prince Adrian smiled, recognizing both her intelligence and her caution. The moment of revelation had arrived, and with it, the test of whether Miss Rosalind Fletcher possessed the courage to accept a future that would be extraordinary in ways she could not yet imagine. "Of course," he said, rising and offering a formal bow. "Allow me to properly introduce myself. I am Prince Adrian Blackthorne, second son of His Majesty King William, and I am offering you the position of chatelaine to a royal household." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge, spanning two different worlds, one where she was a penniless dependent, and another where she would serve as lady of a royal castle with all the protection and privilege such a position entailed. Rosalind stared at him in shock, her mind reeling with the implications of what she had just learned. She had not merely been rescued by a kind stranger, she had been offered sanctuary by a prince of the realm. The question now was whether she possessed the courage to accept it. The silence that followed Prince Adrian's revelation stretched between them like a chasm that neither seemed quite ready to cross. Rosalind stared at him with eyes that reflected a dozen different emotions: shock, disbelief, gratitude, and something that might have been terror at the magnitude of what was being offered. "Your Royal Highness," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible, I had no idea. How can you possibly offer such a position to someone in my circumstances?" Prince Adrian resumed his seat with the same careful grace he had shown throughout their conversation, though now Rosalind could see the royal breeding in every gesture. "My circumstances, Miss Fletcher, are perhaps more complex than they appear. The property I inherited, Ravenshollow Castle, comes with complications that require someone of exceptional discretion and capability." "What kind of complications?" Rosalind asked, though she wasn't certain she wanted to know the answer. Prince Adrian was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing how much truth to reveal. "The previous owner was my great-uncle, Prince Malcolm, who had been estranged from the royal family for over 30 years. He chose to live in isolation in Scotland, and during that time he took in various individuals who had nowhere else to turn. The castle currently houses several such persons, including children who have never known proper guidance or education." The picture he painted was one of a charitable household run by an eccentric royal relative, but Rosalind sensed there were deeper currents he was not revealing. "And you wish me to bring order to this establishment?" "I wish you to bring hope," Prince Adrian said quietly. "These are people who have been forgotten by society, Miss Fletcher. They need someone who understands what it means to lose everything and find the strength to rebuild. They need someone who won't judge them for their past circumstances." The words struck Rosalind with unexpected force. This was not simply an offer of employment. It was an invitation to transform despair into purpose, to use her own experience of loss and recovery to help others facing similar circumstances. "Your Royal Highness," she said carefully, "while I am deeply honored by your confidence, I must point out that I have no experience managing a household of any size, much less a castle. My education, while comprehensive, was theoretical rather than practical." "You managed Lord Pemberton's household after his housekeeper fell ill last winter," Prince Adrian replied smoothly. "He wrote to me about your capabilities, mentioning that you had reorganized his staff, improved the efficiency of his kitchens, and increased the comfort of his guests considerably." Rosalind started in surprise. "Lord Pemberton wrote to you about me, frequently. He was extremely proud of your accomplishments and concerned about your future. In his last letter, received just weeks before his death, he expressed his hope that you would find a position worthy of your abilities." Prince Adrian's expression grew serious. "I believe he would approve of what I am offering you." The revelation that her guardian had been corresponding about her with a member of the royal family added yet another layer of complexity to her situation. Had Lord Pemberton intended for her to seek Prince Adrian's assistance? The timing seemed too coincidental to be mere chance. "There is something else you should know," Prince Adrian continued. "The position I am offering comes with certain protections. As chatelaine to a royal household, you would be under the direct protection of the crown. No one, including Marcus Pemberton, could threaten or coerce you while you held such a position." The implications of that protection settled over Rosalind like a warm cloak. She had been living in fear of Marcus discovering her whereabouts and forcing her into the marriage she had refused. Royal protection would make her effectively untouchable by anyone seeking to exploit her vulnerability. The salary would be £200 per annum, Prince Adrian added, plus housing, meals, clothing allowances, and a full staff to assist you. After 5 years of service, you would receive a pension that would allow you to live independently wherever you chose. The offer was so generous, it seemed almost fantastical. £200 annually was more than most gentlemen's younger sons received as allowances, and the security it represented would restore her to the comfortable independence she had lost with Lord Pemberton's death. "Your Royal Highness," Rosalind said slowly, "this offer is far more generous than someone in my position has any right to expect. I cannot help but wonder why you would extend such kindness to a complete stranger." Prince Adrian studied her face with those perceptive amber eyes. "Perhaps because I recognize something in you that reminds me of myself. I too have known what it means to be dependent upon the goodwill of others, to have one's future determined by circumstances beyond one's control." "How could a prince of the realm understand such circumstances?" Rosalind asked, genuinely curious. "Second sons, Miss Fletcher, inherit nothing but what they can earn for themselves. I have been dependent upon my military achievements and personal investments to create my own fortune. The difference between us is that I was born with advantages you have been denied, but I remember the uncertainty of not knowing whether my efforts would prove sufficient." The comparison was illuminating. Prince Adrian had indeed carved his own path rather than relying solely on royal privilege, and his understanding of uncertainty gave weight to his offer of assistance. "There is one more consideration," Prince Adrian said quietly. "The journey to Scotland will take several days, during which propriety will require that you travel under my protection. I propose that we engage my aunt, the Dowager Countess of Whitmore, to serve as your chaperone for the journey and to provide formal introduction to the household at Ravenshollow." The mention of proper chaperoning addressed Rosalind's concerns about the propriety of accepting assistance from an unmarried gentleman, even one of royal blood. With a member of the nobility to provide oversight, the arrangement would be perfectly respectable. Rosalind began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the decision before her. "Your Royal Highness, you offer me salvation when I had given up hope, but I cannot help but feel that I am accepting charity disguised as employment." "Miss Fletcher," Prince Adrian said firmly, "I would not offer you a position I did not genuinely need filled. Ravenshollow Castle requires a chatelaine of intelligence, education, and strength of character. You possess all of these qualities in abundance. What I am offering you is not charity. It is an opportunity for us to be of mutual benefit to each other." The sincerity in his voice convinced Rosalind that his offer was genuine rather than simply an elaborate form of pity. Still, the decision felt monumental. Accepting would mean leaving behind any possibility of the quiet, ordinary life she had once envisioned for herself. "Might I ask for time to consider your offer?" she requested. "This morning I was prepared to sell my mother's jewelry to pay for lodging. Now I find myself contemplating a position that would change my entire life. I hope you understand that I need time to comprehend such a transformation." "Of course," Prince Adrian replied graciously. "Take whatever time you require. I had planned to remain here for another day while my horse rests and I attend to some correspondence. That should give you ample opportunity to reach a decision." As they rose from the breakfast table, Rosalind felt the weight of destiny settling around her like a mantle. The choice before her was between accepting an extraordinary opportunity that would restore her security and purpose, or continuing to struggle alone in a world that had shown her little kindness. "Your Royal Highness," she said, as they reached the dining room door, "may I ask what happened to the previous chatelaine at Ravenshollow?" Prince Adrian paused, his hand on the door handle. "There was no previous chatelaine, Miss Fletcher. The castle has been without proper management for years. What I am offering you is the chance to create something entirely new." As Rosalind made her way to her chamber to contemplate the most important decision of her life, she couldn't shake the feeling that Prince Adrian's offer contained depths she had not yet fathomed. But for the first time in months she felt hope stirring in her chest, the hope that her story might have a happier ending than she had dared to imagine. Rosalind spent the remainder of the day walking in the inn's garden, her mind churning through the implications of Prince Adrian's offer. The autumn flowers were fading, but their lingering beauty reminded her that even endings could be lovely if viewed with the proper perspective. As evening approached, she had nearly convinced herself to accept the position when an unexpected arrival shattered the peace she had found. Marcus Pemberton's carriage thundered into the inn-yard just as the sun was setting, accompanied by 2 outriders and bearing the unmistakable signs of urgent travel. Rosalind watched from her window with growing dread as her nemesis emerged from the vehicle, his handsome face twisted with the familiar combination of arrogance and barely controlled rage that she remembered so well. "Where is she?" Marcus's voice carried clearly through the evening air as he confronted the innkeeper. "I know she's here." The trail led directly to this establishment. Grimsby, clearly intimidated by Marcus's aggressive bearing and obvious wealth, began stammering explanations about various female guests, but Marcus cut him off with an imperious gesture. "Miss Rosalind Fletcher, my uncle's ward. I have it on good authority that she is sheltering here under the protection of some gentleman or other. Produce her immediately, or I shall have this place searched by the local magistrate." Rosalind's blood turned to ice. Somehow Marcus had tracked her to this remote inn, and his mention of protection suggested that he knew about Prince Adrian's involvement. The sanctuary she had thought secure was about to become another trap. A soft knock at her door announced Mrs. Hartwell's arrival, the woman's face pale with anxiety. "Miss, there's a gentleman downstairs demanding to see you. Says he has legal claim on your person and means to take you back to London whether you're willing or not." "Thank you for the warning," Rosalind replied, though her voice shook with fear. "Please tell Mr. Pemberton that I will be down presently." But even as she spoke, Rosalind knew that facing Marcus alone would be disastrous. He had the legal authority to compel her return, the financial resources to overwhelm any resistance, and the moral flexibility to use whatever methods proved necessary to achieve his ends. As if summoned by her desperate thoughts, Prince Adrian appeared in her doorway, his expression grim with understanding. "I take it our Mr. Pemberton has arrived to collect his reluctant bride." "How did you know?" Rosalind asked. "I made inquiries about Marcus Pemberton after our conversation this morning," Prince Adrian replied. "His reputation is even worse than you indicated. The man is deeply in debt, has been banned from several gaming establishments, and is known for his casual cruelty toward women." "Then you understand why I cannot go with him," Rosalind said, though she felt trapped between impossible alternatives. "You're not going anywhere with him," Prince Adrian stated with quiet authority. "The question is whether you're prepared to accept my protection formally, or whether you prefer to continue this struggle alone." Before Rosalind could answer, the sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs announced Marcus's approach. He appeared in the doorway without ceremony, his cold blue eyes taking in the scene with immediate calculation. "Well, well," Marcus said with a smile that held no warmth. "Rosalind, my dear, you've led me quite a chase. And you must be the gentleman who has been harboring my wayward fiancée." "Miss Fletcher is not your fiancée," Prince Adrian replied coolly, "and I am Prince Adrian Blackthorne. You would do well to remember your manners when addressing both the lady and myself." Marcus's confidence faltered slightly at the revelation of royal blood, but his desperation made him reckless. "Your Royal Highness," he said with mocking courtesy, "I'm sure you were unaware that you were harboring a woman who is legally contracted to marry me. Miss Fletcher is my uncle's ward, and his will specifically requires her marriage to me." "The will offers marriage as one option," Rosalind interjected, finding her voice at last. "I chose to decline that option and forfeit my inheritance rather than submit to such an arrangement." "A choice made in ignorance of your true circumstances," Marcus countered. "You thought you had family in Yorkshire to take you in, but that proved to be a miscalculation, didn't it? You have no other options, my dear. Marriage to me is the only protection you're likely to find. Miss Fletcher has been offered a position in my household," Prince Adrian said quietly. "She will not lack for protection or security." Marcus's laugh was harsh and knowing. "How interesting. And what position might that be, Your Royal Highness? I can think of several arrangements that unmarried gentlemen make with beautiful women who find themselves in desperate circumstances." The insult hung in the air like a physical challenge. Prince Adrian's expression went deadly calm. the look of a man who had killed enemies on battlefields and would not hesitate to defend a lady's honor. "You will apologize to Miss Fletcher immediately," Prince Adrian said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "Or you will answer to me personally." "I think not," Marcus replied, though he took a step backward despite himself. "I have legal claim on Miss Fletcher, and I intend to exercise it. The local magistrate will support my rights as her designated guardian." "Will he?" Prince Adrian smiled, and the expression was sharp as a blade. "How unfortunate that the local magistrate is Sir Edmund Whitmore, who happens to be my cousin. I suspect his interpretation of guardianship law may differ from your own." Marcus's face went pale as he realized the extent of the forces arrayed against him. A prince of the realm with family connections to the local authority was not an opponent he could overcome through bullying or legal maneuvering. "This isn't over," Marcus snarled, his composure finally cracking. "Rosalind belongs to me, and I'll have her one way or another." "Actually," Prince Adrian said quietly, "it is over, but not in the way you imagine." He turned to Rosalind with an expression that held both determination and something deeper, something that transformed a rescue into a declaration. "Miss Fletcher," he said formally, "I had intended to offer you employment, but circumstances have changed. I now find myself compelled to offer you something far more significant." He dropped to one knee before her, ignoring Marcus's shocked expression. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The proposal hit Rosalind like lightning. This was no longer about employment or protection. Prince Adrian was offering to make her a princess of the realm, to give her not just security but his name, his rank, and his love. "Your Royal Highness," she whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Adrian," he corrected gently. "If you accept, you need never fear Marcus Pemberton or anyone like him again. You would have my protection, my devotion, and my solemn promise that you would be cherished rather than merely sheltered." Marcus exploded in fury. "This is preposterous. She's a penniless nobody, a charity case with no connections or dowry. You can't seriously intend to marry beneath your station for a woman you've known less than a day." "I intend," Prince Adrian said, rising to face Marcus with dangerous calm, "to marry a woman of intelligence, courage, and integrity, qualities that are apparently foreign to your understanding. Miss Fletcher's worth cannot be measured in pounds or property." Rosalind looked between the two men, one offering domination disguised as protection, the other offering partnership wrapped in devotion, and realized that this moment would define the rest of her life. "Yes," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Yes, Adrian, I will marry you." The acceptance transformed everything. Marcus's legal claims became meaningless against royal privilege. His threats became empty bluster, and his presence became an unwelcome intrusion that could be summarily dismissed. "Congratulations," Marcus said with venomous sarcasm. "I hope you both find happiness in your fairy tale. But mark my words, this marriage will bring you nothing but trouble." "The only trouble," Prince Adrian replied as he took Rosalind's hand in his, "will be dealing with fools who mistake love for weakness." As Marcus stormed from the room, defeated and furious, Rosalind found herself engaged to a prince and protected by the most powerful institution in the realm. But more than that, she found herself loved by a man who had seen her at her lowest point and chosen to lift her to heights she had never imagined possible. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the private chapel of Whitmore House, the country estate of Prince Adrian's aunt, the Dowager Countess. The ceremony was intimate but magnificent, attended by carefully selected members of the nobility who understood the importance of welcoming the new Princess Adrian into their ranks with appropriate dignity. Rosalind stood before the altar in a gown of ivory silk that had belonged to Prince Adrian's mother, altered to fit her perfectly by the finest seamstresses in England. The dress was a symbol of acceptance into the royal family, and wearing it felt like donning a mantle of belonging she had never expected to possess. Prince Adrian looked resplendent in his dress uniform, the deep blue fabric setting off his amber eyes, and the gold braid speaking to his military achievements. But it was the expression on his face as he watched Rosalind approach down the aisle that took her breath away. Pure devotion mixed with wonder, as if he could hardly believe his good fortune. The Dowager Countess had proven to be a formidable ally in preparing for the wedding and Rosalind's integration into royal society. Lady Whitmore was a woman of sharp intelligence and firm principles, and she had declared herself thoroughly satisfied with her nephew's choice of bride. "The girl has backbone," she had announced to anyone who would listen. "Adrian needs a wife who will stand up to him when necessary and support him when appropriate. Pretty faces are common enough, but character is rare. The ceremony itself was conducted by the Bishop of Yorkshire, who had known Prince Adrian since childhood and spoke movingly about the sacred nature of marriage as both earthly partnership and divine blessing. As they exchanged vows, Rosalind felt the weight of her past falling away like discarded chains, replaced by the bright promise of a future she could hardly have imagined. "With this ring, I thee wed," Prince Adrian said, sliding a magnificent sapphire onto her finger, a stone that matched his eyes and had been in the Blackthorn family for 3 centuries. "And with my heart, I pledge my eternal devotion." When it came time for Rosalind to speak her vows, her voice was clear and strong, carrying across the chapel to every witness present. "I give you my heart, my loyalty, and my promise to stand beside you in all things, as your partner in this life and whatever may come after." The kiss that sealed their marriage was gentle but passionate, a promise of the love that had grown between them with startling speed and depth. As they turned to face their guests as husband and wife, Rosalind saw nothing but approval and welcome in the assembled faces. The wedding breakfast was held in the Dowager Countess's grand dining room, where toasts were offered and congratulations shared. But the most meaningful moment came when Sir Edmund Whitmore, the magistrate who had unknowingly played a role in their courtship, raised his glass with particular solemnity. "To Princess Adrian," he said, "who has reminded us all that true nobility lies not in birth or fortune, but in character and courage. May her example inspire us to look beyond surface appearances to the worth that lies beneath." The assembled company drank the toast with genuine enthusiasm, and Rosalind realized that she had not merely married a prince. She had been accepted into a community that valued merit above accident of birth. As the celebration continued around them, Prince Adrian leaned close to his new wife's ear. "Are you prepared for our Scottish adventure, Princess?" The title still felt strange on her tongue, but Rosalind was learning to embrace the transformation that had overtaken her life. "I believe I'm ready for anything, as long as you're beside me." "Then you should know," Prince Adrian said quietly, "that Raven's Hollow Castle holds more surprises than I initially revealed. The ward I mentioned is actually 7 wards. Children ranging in age from 6 to 16 who have been living wild in the castle since my great-uncle's death. They are the reason I truly needed someone with your particular combination of education, patience, and understanding." Rosalind stared at him in shock, then began to laugh. 7 children? And you thought 1 ward would be an easier explanation? I thought if I mentioned 7 traumatized children living like wolves in a ruined castle, you might decide that poverty was preferable to such a challenge," Prince Adrian admitted. 7 children, Rosalind repeated, her mind already working through the implications. "Adrian, do you have any idea what you've gotten yourself into?" "A lifetime of chaos, probably," he replied cheerfully. "But with you to help me manage it, I suspect it will be the most rewarding chaos imaginable." The revelation should have been daunting, but instead, Rosalind felt her heart swell with purpose. These were children who had been abandoned and forgotten, just as she had been. They needed someone who understood what it meant to lose everything and fight to rebuild from nothing. "We'll need teachers," she said practically, "and proper clothing and medical attention and probably a great deal of patience." "We'll need love," Prince Adrian corrected. "Everything else we can arrange, but love is what transforms a house into a home." As their carriage rolled north toward Scotland the following morning, Rosalind reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 weeks ago, she had been kneeling in the mud before an inn, begging for shelter. Now she was a princess of the realm, traveling to take up residence in a castle, where she would have the opportunity to transform the lives of 7 children who needed exactly what she had to offer. "Do you ever wonder," she asked Adrian as the Yorkshire countryside rolled past their windows, "whether Lord Pemberton somehow arranged our meeting? The timing seems too perfect to be mere coincidence." "I've wondered the same thing," Adrian admitted. "He wrote to me about you so often, and with such specific detail about your character and capabilities, that I sometimes think he was preparing me to recognize you when the time came." "He was always convinced that everything happened for a reason," Rosalind said softly. "Even the worst circumstances could lead to unexpected blessings if one was patient enough to see the pattern." "Then perhaps our story is proof that he was right," Adrian replied, taking her hand and lifting it to his lips. "The worst day of your life led directly to the best day of mine." As their carriage crested a hill that offered a view of the Scottish borders in the distance, Rosalind felt a deep sense of completion settling over her. She had lost her family, her security, and her certainty about the future, But in return she had gained a love that transformed every loss into foundation for something better. The woman who had knelt in the mud before the Crimson Rose Inn had been desperate and alone. The woman who now travelled north as Princess Adrian was cherished and empowered, ready to extend to 7 orphaned children the same second chance at happiness that had been granted to her. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words coming from the deepest part of her heart. "And I love you," Adrian replied, his amber eyes soft with devotion. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days we have yet to discover together." Outside their carriage windows, the landscape was changing from the gentle hills of Yorkshire to the wild beauty of Scotland. But inside their private sanctuary, 2 hearts beat in perfect rhythm as they journeyed toward a future that promised to be far more wonderful than either had dared to dream. 5 years later, Princess Adrian stood on the battlements of Raven's Hollow Castle, watching the morning sun paint the Highland peaks in shades of gold and rose. The fortress that had once been a place of abandonment and decay now bustled with life and purpose, its halls echoing with laughter instead of emptiness. Below in the courtyard, she could see her husband overseeing the sword training of the older boys, his patient instruction transforming what had once been wild children into confident young gentlemen. The transformation in all 7 children had been remarkable, but none more so than in Jamie, the oldest, who had appointed himself protector of the younger ones during their years of abandonment. "Your Royal Highness," came a familiar voice from behind her. Rosalind turned to see Mrs. MacLeod, the Scottish woman who served as housekeeper and had become like a mother to them all. "Young Moira is asking for you. She's having difficulty with her French lesson and refuses to accept help from anyone else." Rosalind smiled, remembering her own struggles with languages before Lord Pemberton's patient instruction had opened new worlds to her. "Tell her I'll be there directly, and Mrs. MacLeod, how many times must I ask you to call me Rosalind when we're en famille?" "Begging your pardon, Your Highness, but it wouldn't be proper," the older woman replied with the stubborn dignity that Rosalind had come to love. "You're a princess of the realm now, and we'll not forget it, no matter how kindly you treat us common folk." The exchange highlighted the delicate balance Rosalind had learned to maintain between royal dignity and personal warmth. The children needed to understand their privileged position in society, while also learning humility and compassion for those less fortunate. As she made her way to the schoolroom that had once been Prince Malcolm's abandoned study, Rosalind reflected on the challenges and triumphs of the past 5 years. Each child had required different approaches and patience as they learned to trust adult guidance again. Some had come to the castle fleeing abuse, others had been abandoned by families who couldn't care for them, and one, little Thomas, had been found living alone in the ruins after his grandmother's death. "Princess Rosalind!" 6-year-old Moira launched herself at Rosalind with the enthusiasm that characterized everything she did. "I can't make the French words sound pretty like you do. They come out all wrong and scratchy." "Let me hear you try," Rosalind said, settling beside the child at the small table where grammar books and slates were scattered in organized chaos. "Remember what we learned about letting the words flow like music." As they worked through the pronunciation exercises, Rosalind marveled at the child's quick intelligence. Moira had arrived at the castle 3 years ago, a wild thing of perhaps 8 who spoke only Gaelic and trusted no one. Now she was a bright, curious girl whose thirst for knowledge reminded Rosalind of herself at that age. "Much better," Rosalind praised, as Moira successfully navigated a particularly difficult passage. "Your accent is becoming quite elegant." "Will I sound like a real lady when I'm grown?" Moira asked with the earnestness that characterized children's deepest concerns. "You are already a real lady," Rosalind replied gently. "Being a lady isn't about how you speak or what clothes you wear. It's about how you treat other people, and whether you use your advantages to help those who need assistance." The lesson she was teaching went far beyond French pronunciation. Each of these children would grow up with privileges most people could never imagine, but Rosalind was determined that they would also understand responsibility and compassion. A commotion in the courtyard drew their attention to the windows. A royal courier had arrived, bearing the distinctive red and gold livery that indicated urgent business from London. Rosalind felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that royal correspondence always brought, the reminder that their peaceful life in Scotland existed within the larger context of national politics and royal obligations. "Continue with your exercises, dear," she told Moira. "I must see what news has arrived from court." Prince Adrian met her in the Great Hall, the official dispatch already opened in his hands. His expression was serious but not alarmed, suggesting important news rather than crisis. "What is it?" Rosalind asked, noting the royal seal and official signatures. "An invitation," Adrian replied, though his tone suggested it was more command than request. "My brother wishes us to return to London for the season. It seems the Queen has taken particular interest in our educational efforts here and desires to meet the children." The prospect of returning to London filled Rosalind with mixed emotions. She had found happiness and purpose in the relative isolation of Ravenshollow, but she understood the importance of royal duty and the value of court recognition for their work. "All of the children?" she asked. "All 7. They are to be presented as examples of successful charitable intervention, and their education is to serve as a model for similar institutions throughout the realm." The implications were significant. Royal approval would mean increased funding and support for their efforts, but it would also mean scrutiny and the pressure of public attention. The children would need careful preparation for court society. "When?" Rosalind asked, already beginning to plan the massive undertaking such a journey would require. "We're expected in London within the month," Adrian replied. "Long enough to prepare the children, but not so long that the court's interest might wane." That evening, after the children had been told about the upcoming journey and their excited chatter had finally died down, Rosalind and Adrian walked together through the castle gardens she had created from what was once a wilderness of weeds and neglect. "Are you ready to return to society?" Adrian asked, slipping his arm around her waist as they paused beside the fountain that now served as the garden's centerpiece. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," Rosalind replied, leaning into his warmth. 5 years ago I thought my life had ended. Now I understand it was just beginning." "Do you ever regret the path that brought us together?" Adrian asked, a question that had become something of a ritual between them. "Never," Rosalind said firmly. "Every hardship, every moment of despair, every choice that seemed impossible, all of it was necessary to bring me to exactly where I needed to be." They stood together in comfortable silence, listening to the evening sounds of their thriving household. Somewhere in the castle, Mrs. MacLeod was supervising the preparation of tomorrow's meals. In the library, the older boys were engaged in their evening studies. In the nursery, the younger children were being tucked into warm beds with stories and lullabies. "I love our life here," Rosalind said softly. "So do I," Adrian agreed. "But I think it's time to share what we've built with the world. These children deserve recognition for how far they've come, and other children deserve the same opportunities we've been able to provide." The next morning brought the organized chaos of preparing for a royal journey. 7 children needed appropriate clothing for court presentation. Educational materials had to be packed for continued lessons during travel, and the castle staff required detailed instructions for managing affairs during their extended absence. But as Rosalind supervised the preparations, she felt a deep satisfaction in what they had accomplished. The terrified, abandoned children who had once hidden in the castle's ruins were now confident young people, ready to represent themselves with dignity before the highest levels of society. "Princess Rosalind," Jamie approached her with the serious demeanor that characterized the boy who had once been their unofficial leader. Now 16 and tall for his age, he bore little resemblance to the fierce child who had initially challenged every attempt at civilized behavior. "I wanted to thank you for everything you've given us." "Jamie," Rosalind said gently, "you gave me as much as I gave you. You taught me that family is created by love and choice, not just blood and birth." "I know the other children feel the same way," Jamie continued. "We know how lucky we are, and we won't disappoint you in London." "You could never disappoint me," Rosalind replied with complete honesty. "You've already exceeded every hope I had for your futures." As their carriage finally rolled away from Ravenshollow Castle, bound for London and whatever new adventures awaited them, Rosalind reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. The frightened woman who had knelt in the mud before the Crimson Rose Inn would never have imagined that her story would become one of triumph, love, and service to others. "Regrets?" Adrian asked, noting her contemplative expression. "Gratitude," Rosalind corrected, taking his hand as the Scottish Highlands rolled past their windows. "Infinite gratitude for the path that led me to you and to them." Behind them, 7 children chattered excitedly about their upcoming adventure, their voices a chorus of hope and possibility. Ahead of them lay London and the court, where their work would be evaluated and potentially expanded to help countless other children throughout the realm. But in their carriage, in the space between past and future. Prince Adrian and Princess Rosalind traveled together toward whatever destiny awaited them, secure in the knowledge that love had indeed transformed every ending into a new beginning. The woman who had once knelt in desperation had learned to stand in dignity, and in doing so, had lifted others to heights they never could have reached alone. If you want more stories like this video, and subscribe to support the channel.